Thank you guys so much for coming out tonight. I wanted to just tell you a couple of fun programs we have coming up at the library. Have any of you guys been doing our virtual programs? Anybody? That's okay. I know, we're all a little sick of virtual. I get it. I get it. So we're very excited to see everybody here. This is our first big in-person program. We have Joyce here. We'll give her an early round of applause. Very exciting. We have refreshments in the back. There's going to be time to get our books signed. We have our Stone Harbor Bookshop selling some books for you if you want to get her newest. We also have refreshments in the back. Can't remember if I said that yet. And we have our program handout. So in August and later in this month in July, we have a couple more in-person things going on. We have Art in the Park happening. It's going to be down at Pavilion number 5. We have Brendan Schaefer. He's a local artist, and he's going to be doing a couple of fun art things. Did anyone get out to the Wildwood Sand Sculpting Contest? Maybe? No? Yes? He won! He won, and we have him! Very exciting! So he's going to be our artist. We're going to be making little dragonfly brooches. We're going to be doing fun stuff with cupcakes. No knives. We're not cutting anything with knives, so I had to say no to that. We also have some of our cooking programs coming back. Have any of you guys been to a cooking program? Yes, very good. Down in the back. Love it. Excellent. So we also have some virtual cooking. We have Carolyn Vinci. She's going to be doing a Cook With Me. So you guys can learn how to make your own ricotta cheese at home. How fabulous. It's as simple as it sounds. She's just going to make it. We're going to send you the list of ingredients. Sign up ahead of time. It's going to be virtual, so you'll watch from home. You'll cook with her. She'll guide us all as we make all the mistakes. So it'll be very exciting. We're looking forward to September. We're working on getting some more in-person, indoor stuff going, depending on everything that's happening. So keep your eyes open on our event calendar. We're hoping to get everyone back in. And of course, our doors are open, so feel free to come visit us. Your library cards are still good. You can come on in, check out our books. We have Joyce's stuff. We have anything you want to read. So that's pretty much it for the library. And I'm going to bring up our County Commissioner, Marie Hayes. Big round of applause.
Thank you, Natalie. Good evening, everyone. Okay, for those of you out there who are still mad at me because the library was closed, I'm sorry. Okay, but we're all back again and we're all happy, and as you can see, the library is full bore. Okay? So when I became a commissioner, okay, which means that I am an elected official, also known as a politician. Don't hold it against me, okay? I never knew that I would get to do so many cool things. And one of the things I get to do is I get to oversee the library. And I got to tell you something. Ladies and gentlemen, bar none, we got the best in the state. Let's give them a hand. So, before I became a politician, my life before was in police work. I was in police work for 29 years, which really prepared me for being a politician.
I will return my library books, I promise.
So, I had only been in office for a little bit, and the ladies from the library said, then I was a freeholder, and you no longer get to call me a freeloader, okay? I'm a commissioner now. They said, we have an author coming in. Would you please honor us by coming and introducing that author? And since that time, I have introduced so many authors that have just, I'm amazed. I'm amazed. And I have to tell you, I've never been that big of a reader. Being a cop, all I read was police reports, you know. So. But I always ask the library, could you do me a favor and give me the background of the author that I'm going to be introducing so I can, do, a nice introduction. Well, let me tell you something. I was stopped in my tracks when I started to read about this lady. I was absolutely stopped in my tracks. You are amazing. And not just because you are a fabulous author, but because of everything that you went through in your life. And you know what? You had every reason to let people push you back, and you didn't. And I am telling you, I am so proud to have met you. I mean it. I mean it. Ladies and gentlemen, I got to tell you something. The majority of my career, I worked on child abuse cases and sex crimes. That's what my area of specialty was. And I read what was done to this woman, and I'm telling you, it made me cry. It did. She is an unbelievable woman. And I'm not here, look, I don't want to take up your time because she's the one you want to hear. But I got to tell you something. I was reading an interview that she did, and I want to read to you something that she said. What do you hope is the legacy of Joyce Maynard, author, journalist, mother, friend, student, etc.? Whom do you wish to inspire with your writing? My legacy? Listen to this. Gosh, I never think about that. But I hope what might endure about my work is respect for children and for the people who care for them. Parenthood, specifically motherhood, is such an undervalued endeavor in the world of money, fame, and success. And I hope my work, I'm thinking of the memoir here specifically, At Home in the World, may stand as a reminder to people whose lives have been shaped or altered by painful and very possible traumatic events, as mine was, that it is not simply okay to speak of them, but valuable, possibly essential, that the doing so will set you free. Girlfriend, it has set you free. You are amazing. I hope, as a writer who has been called shameless more times than I can count, that I've released some readers and writers out from one of my least favorite emotions, shame, because you should have none. You are amazing, and I am so honored to have met you. I mean it. I am so honored. And girlfriend, she's coming back to the park and zoo tomorrow. You're going to get a tour like you've never had of a zoo before. I oversee that too. So,
Thank you.
get out of here.
Oh my gosh.
Ladies and gentlemen, I need not say anything more. Joyce Maynard.
Marie, can you hear me okay? Yeah. Marie, I published my first book in 1973. I have given a lot of book talks. That might be the most beautiful introduction I've ever heard. Thank you. And I have to tell you, well, a few things. First of all, I'm really distracted by that ricotta, and I think I may have to change my travel plans to stick around for that. I love ricotta, and I have no idea how to make it. So I want to, oh gosh, I want to say so many things, and most of all, I want to hear from you. So I'll give you a little background. This is my 17th book and my 10th novel, and I've been working on it for 3 years, and some writers are really introverted types, and they just really like to be alone at home and have nobody bother them, and I totally respect that, but that is not me. I am actually kind of an extrovert, and I love going out in the world, and I actually need to meet the people who inspire me to keep writing, and that's you. And so when I recognized a while back that there was going to be no book tour, I felt so disappointed. But I happened to be, I've never been to the Jersey Shore before. I have never done a talk in all of New Jersey, let alone a zoo. But it happened that I was visiting family friends in the area, and a wonderful woman who is a former writing student of mine. I teach writing sometimes, and if you want to find out more about that, ask me later. And I teach memoir, only memoir, because as Marie says, I believe everybody has a story to tell, and I love to help you tell them. But my student said, would you be interested in seeing if we can set up a live event in Cape May? And I thought, oh my gosh, I get to actually meet real readers. So if you're happy to be here, I'll wager not even half as much as I am to be here with you. Thank you. Thank you for coming. And doesn't it feel great to be out here and together again and having these conversations? I want to tell you a little bit about this book, although before anything, I want to say that I will read from this book and I'll describe this book, but really what I like best to do is hear from you and have the conversation. So sometimes, I don't think this is going to be a New Jersey issue at all, but sometimes a group is very quiet and shy. And yes, you're laughing. It's ridiculous in New Jersey. I know this. But I just want to say to you right now, don't be, please. Because I've come a long way from the state of New Hampshire to hear from you. And don't feel at all inhibited about asking absolutely whatever's on your mind. About this book or other books or writing or... I can't help you with ricotta cheese, but or sand brooches. But luckily, somebody else can. Okay, Count the Ways. I don't have a favorite book any more than I have a favorite of my children, of course, but this book occupies a very special place on my shelf of the books that I've written. And in many ways, it's the story that's closest to my heart and closest to my life. Incidentally, I want to say very quickly, there is no sexual abuse in this book. That's like, we don't need to go there. And many hard things do happen in this story. This is the story of a family. And you know, I've written about, I don't write thrillers, I don't write mysteries, but actually, as far as I'm concerned, what happens in human relationships is as dramatic and compelling as any superhero story or big car chase story or crime story. As much as I do really love crime stories, I don't really write them. It follows, Count the Ways follows one family from the 70s, from the early 70s, actually before the woman meets the man who is ultimately her partner, her husband, Eleanor. We meet her in the early 70s. The Vietnam War is going on, the Watergate hearings. It's another whole time in our country. And they fall in love, and in that very idealistic and hopeful way of two young people getting together, they move to a farm in New Hampshire, and they have 3 children. I won't conceal from you that although this book is not the story of my life, many aspects of it were informed by my life. I did meet an artist husband in the 70s and moved to a farm in New Hampshire and had 3 children. And I understand very well the next part of the story, which is how it can be that 2 people who deeply love each other and have known tenderness and passion and the dream of making a family together can drift apart. And these 2 do. And then there is a crushing, heartbreaking event that takes place. And the wife, Eleanor, cannot forgive her husband for what she believes his failures to have been. And they do not stay together. But the story does not end there. I follow Eleanor and Cam and their 3 children and the many people who become the satellites in their lives, the players on the softball team that Cam plays with, and Eleanor's best friend, and the man who falls in love with her after, and good people and not so good people over the decades. The novel goes all the way through to the 2000s. It's a very American novel. Among other things, I happen to be a real follower of just recent American history. I guess I'd say the history that I have lived. So this book is set against the backdrop of so many of the things that many of you are going to remember. I love it when I see younger people in the audience, and I do, but many of you are about my age too, 1953. We've got the Vietnam War in this book, and the death of John Lennon, and the Challenger explosion, and many other things in between, and the music, and the movies, and the things that came and went, the clothes, but most of all, the feelings. So I want to read you a short passage from Count the Ways. I want to say too that although I met a woman as I was signing somebody's book, and she said, is this a sad story? Because I want to give it to my friend, and she's had a hard year, as many of us did. Hard things happen in this book. But ultimately, I consider this my most optimistic book. It's a realistic book, and I don't know who can get through 4 decades of life on Earth, 5, in my case now, 6 and counting, and not have very hard things happen. It has more to do with what you do about those hard things. There's a review up on Amazon right now that I'm not very happy with, where somebody said, this book is depressing. And I will say it was a minority opinion. But she said, it's just like life, and I don't want life. I want to escape from life. I want to write about life, but I also want to locate the joy and hope in life. And this book is ultimately about forgiveness. And many people need to find it. And I won't say more. So I'm going to read you a very short passage. This comes after Eleanor is no longer married to Cam, and I'm not really making any spoilers here. I think you'd find that out very early along. And this, I will say, was somewhat informed by my own experience of being a single parent of 3 children for many years and having had the experience of being alone at Christmas. She alternates years with her ex-husband, her children's father. And the chapter that I'm going to read a section of tonight is the story of it. She makes the decision to go on a blind date on Christmas Day. So she's never met this. Are you having a hard time hearing? Or?
No, Paige.
Paige. Oh, it's page 333, but you don't need to follow along. No. I just let it carry you away. Because I'm also jumping around a little bit to make it shorter, because I want to make sure I save time for you. Okay. So Eleanor has driven an hour and a half to meet this man. He's a single dad. They have never met before. Russell's sons answered the door. The older one wore thick glasses and the kind of haircut a boy gets when his father, economizing, tries to cut it himself, a bowl cut. He was very thin, his pants held up, but just barely, by a fake leather belt. He was wearing a clip-on Christmas tie that lit up when you pushed a button, which he did. The smaller brother was only slightly less thin. No glasses, but when he stepped forward to greet her, she saw that he had some form of cerebral palsy, mild but recognizable. I'm Arthur, the older one told her. This is my brother, Benny. His umbilical cord was tangled up around his neck when he was born. That's why he talks a little funny. He's not retarded or anything. This was old news to Benny. He paid no attention to the health report. We bought a turkey, he said. Usually we go to the Ramada for Christmas, but my dad said since we were having company, we'd make a feast at home. We got 2 kinds of dip, Arthur added. Someone had decorated the entrance with a Merry Christmas sign and a cutout of Santa in a disco outfit. Eleanor would not have noticed if the older brother, Arthur, hadn't pointed this out, but they had hung a bunch of mistletoe from the ceiling. Stand here, okay? Benny said. That means my dad gets to kiss you. His speech was a little difficult to understand, but Eleanor figured out what he was saying. Until now, she had not actually laid eyes on her host, but now she saw him, standing a little uneasily a few feet behind his sons, a pale man of average height and narrow, sloping shoulders, wearing a red and green sweater with a reindeer on front and a bow tie. He had a regretful air about him, as if he already knew he was a disappointment, but maybe his sons would win her over. Don't worry, he said. I wasn't going to do anything like that. The boys are just excited that you're here. Benny let her in, the picture coming to mind of Ricardo Montalban's small sidekick, Tattoo, on Fantasy Island, escorting that week's guests off the plane and down the plank leading to the island. Russell was no Ricardo Montalban, but he had clearly worked hard to set the stage for her arrival. There were carnations on the table, and though it was daylight out, candles already lit. He had a record playing, the Carpenter's Christmas Portrait. Russell asked how her drive had gone. Arthur asked what kind of car she had and concealed his disappointment when she told him Subaru. My brother really loves Dodge Chargers, Betty told her. He was hoping you had one, but that's okay. Russell had bought wine, and now he poured her a glass, red, a little sweet. I'm not really much of a drinker, he said, but it's a special occasion. Eleanor handed Russell the pie. The boys gathered around to admire it, as if what she had brought were a rare and exotic treasure. This may have been their first homemade pie. You're pretty, Benny said. We were talking about it before you got here since we didn't know what you look like. Arthur said the important part is if you're nice, but it's an extra bonus when someone's pretty. He turned to Arthur. Doesn't Eleanor look like that girl on the commercial for Diet Coke, the one with the brown hair? He spoke her name. Not everyone you met did that. Arthur gave Benny a look. Don't mind my brother, he said. He's a little crazy. Not really, Russell said. Maybe he was worried she'd believe this. Also, he didn't want to hurt Benny's feelings. She had only been in their apartment 5 minutes, but already she understood this. Russell was looking for a wife. Even more, Russell's sons wanted a mother, and he would do what he could to find them one. If she were up for it, the two of them could be married by Valentine's Day, probably. Do you have kids? Benny asked. 3. They're with their father today. A worried look came over Benny. Maybe she was another one of those mothers, like his own, who'd left. We haven't seen our mom since I was a baby, he said. It turned out we weren't her cup of tea. She wanted to ride around listening to the Grateful Dead. There was probably more to it than that, Benny, Russell said. Your mother loved you. She just had some problems being a mom. Do you have problems being a mom? Benny asked Eleanor. She told him she didn't. She could have said more, but this was not the moment. They arranged themselves at the table. Benny made sure Eleanor was sitting next to his father. Arthur held her chair out for her. You taught your boys good manners, Eleanor said. Eagle Scout, he told her. Russell carried in the turkey. From the silver plastic platter on which the meat was arranged, it appeared to have been purchased, pre-cooked, and pre-sliced, along with disposable plastic bowls of cranberry sauce and gravy. I found this great place that makes everything ready to go, Russell said, but he'd made the sweet potatoes and cornbread from scratch. It's called Stop and Shop, Arthur pointed out. They loved her pie. They loved everything about her. Over the course of the meal, the things Benny complimented Eleanor on included her hair, her necklace, her shoes, her baking, her appetite, and when he showed her a patch he'd recently earned at Cub Scouts and asked if she could stitch it on his shirt for him, her sewing ability, along with, related to this, good eyesight, as proven by her ease in threading the needle. She was sitting at the table, sewing on the patch, when it came to her what this reminded her of. Peter Pan and the Lost Boys. She was Wendy. A wave of terrible sadness came over her then. These were children without a mother, and she was a mother without children. It should be perfect. More than anything, more even than a man who loved her, Eleanor wanted this back. The life of taking care of children the way she used to, living in a family, sharing meals like this. Well, not like this one, but other meals, the good kind. But it was not something you could find in the pages of the classifieds, this family life. She wanted it with her own children, not the 2 sweet, pale strangers who sat across the table from her, their eyes full of unconcealed longing. And in the seat next to her, the sweet, gentle Eagle Scout who would probably love her forever if she gave him the opportunity, which she would not. She had planned to leave as soon as she had stitched on the patch, but when she handed the shirt back to Benny, he said they had a surprise for her. Let's do our act for Eleanor, he said to Arthur. They had worked up a scene from the Three Amigos movie. His brother looked uneasy. I don't think so, Benny. She probably doesn't want to see it, and anyway, it's kind of lame. Artie's just saying that, Benny told her. You should see my brother's Steve Martin imitation. My dad does the Chevy Chase part. I'm Martin Short. Now Russell was looking embarrassed. I only do this because they need a third person, he told Eleanor. I'm not very good at being funny. When I make people laugh, it's usually unintentional. Come on, Benny said. With that odd, slightly spastic gait of his, he was clearing a space in the middle of the living room now, his floppy puppet arms flailing. Arthur got up out of his chair to join him. You too, Dad, Benny said. The three of them stood before her then, taking their positions, their best imitation of three men doing their best imitation of cowboys. Benny started it off. Hey, you slime-eating dogs, he said, facing the invisible desperados. Hey, you scum-sucking pigs. Hey, you scum-sucking pigs. This was Russell's line. He delivered it with unexpected feeling. You sons of a motherless goat, Arthur now. His Steve Martin impersonation was more impressive than Eleanor would have anticipated. He even executed a dance step, more or less. For a second there, Benny stepped out of character, addressing Eleanor. Here's the part where one of the bad guys says, and who are you? You can be him. You can do that part. And who are you? Eleanor asked them. Wherever there is injustice, you will find us, Benny said, as Martin Short, the hero mariachi. Wherever there is suffering, we'll be there. The next line was delivered in unison. Clearly, they'd done this before, though if Eleanor had to guess, she would say this might have been the first time they had an audience, the first time they performed it for a woman, anyway. You will find the Three Amigos. They took a bow. Eleanor clapped. If this had been an audition, and in some ways it was, you would have to admit they'd done a good job. There was one more thing they needed to do before she left, Benny told her. It was always Benny taking the lead. Russell and Arthur were probably accustomed to this and grateful for it. Without Benny as MC, this would have been an excruciatingly quiet gathering. Do you want to see something really special? He asked her. Who would say no? He took her hand. A little unsteadily, he led her into a small, dark room at the end of a narrow hallway. This was the bedroom of a man for whom a bedroom is nothing more than a place to sleep. A mattress on the floor with a faded spread pulled up over a single pillow, a pile of laundry waiting to be sorted at one end of the room, a plastic storage crate containing a great many white tube socks. On the bureau was a framed black and white picture of a geeky-looking wedding couple, the bride wearing glasses with a broad, buck-toothed smile, the groom bearing a strong resemblance to Russell, a younger and more hopeful one. There was another picture, Russell with a crew cut, wearing a Boy Scout uniform. He was probably around 15 at the time. You wouldn't believe all the things our dad knows how to do, Benny told her. Astronomy, leatherwork, insect studies, kayaking, animal husbandry, archery, cooking, any kind of knot you want to make, he can do it. For a moment then, crazily, Eleanor imagined herself in this bed with Russell, a place she would never be. She imagined his soft, pale, naked body on the mattress beside her, Benny and Arthur asleep in the beds in the next room, happy in the knowledge they'd found themselves a mother. Now Benny led her to a bookcase at the far end of the room, piled high with papers and folders, a plastic bag of receipts, an instrument case that suggested it housed a trombone, stacks of old comic books, more tube socks. We never showed this to anyone before, Benny told her, taking down a wooden box. He set it on the bed as a person might some sacred possession, a Fabergé egg, the last remaining copy of the Gutenberg Bible, a homemade apple pie, hers. He opened it.
"They're arrowheads," Benny told her. His voice was hushed, as if someone might be listening in, and if so, might steal the precious box. "My dad found them in the woods all over Ohio when he was a kid. There's 246 in here." "It's okay to pick one up," Benny told her. "Now he brings us along to look for more. Every weekend we go on an arrowhead finding adventure. We never brought anybody along before, but you could come." "That sounds like fun," Eleanor said. There was no need to tell them here today that she would not be joining those expeditions. He reached into the box. The arrowhead he chose to lift from the pile appeared to be familiar to him. He probably knew every one. He placed it in Eleanor's hand. She wrapped her fingers around it, letting herself take in the sharpness of the stone. She pressed it against her skin, hard enough that it almost hurt. "There's nobody else like our dad," he said. "He's the best." She studied his face. He could not have tried any harder to win her. Minutes later, she was back on the highway. Merry Christmas. So now, this is the part that's fun for me, when I get to hear from you. Absolutely whatever's on your mind. It's unlikely that you've read this book. It just came out a few days ago. But if you want to ask about other books I've written, or how I wrote this one, or thoughts about single parent dating, I was an expert on that one. Go for it. Yes. What's your name? Lisa, hi. Oh, great. Oh, great.
So I've noticed that you ended up having a quarantine in Guatemala. Is that right?
Yes, I recommend it as a quarantine spot. What happened is that for the last 22 years, I have hosted a writing workshop in a very unlikely place. It's not Provence or, Tuscany. But it's better than any of those places. It's a small Mayan village on the shores of what may be the most beautiful lake in the world, surrounded by volcanoes, Lake Atitlan, and I have a house there. And I have come to love the Mayan culture, which has been a part of my life for all of my adult life. So last March, a year ago March, we knew something was happening, but we didn't have a clue how big and bad it was going to be. And I was due to teach my workshop. 18 women were coming down to Guatemala, and I was going to be there for whoever showed up. There wasn't, at that point, a single case of COVID in Guatemala. So I flew down, and 8 women spent the week with me. During the course of that week, the airport shut down. Nobody really knew how they were going to get home. We were sequestered at my house, which incidentally if you're going to be sequestered somewhere, there are not too many better places. It was pretty beautiful, and we got to swim and look at the volcano, and our chef didn't make it, but we improvised and we ate well. And the week passed, and there was still no way to get home, so the workshop just continued. And eventually, I knew that the U.S. Embassy was going to send planes, which they did. But I didn't really want to go home. I knew that was the best place. Of course, for me, it also was home. And I actually invited 2 of my writing students, who were both 32 years old and didn't have families back home or jobs waiting for them. They were going to be working virtually, to stay with me. I didn't have a clue we'd be together for 6 months, but yes, we were. And I finished this book there during that period. It's a book that has nothing to do with Guatemala, but I wrote all day long, and at night I read to the girls, I called them. One of them created a podcast. She was an immigration activist and specialist, and she was doing her podcast. The other was a musician, and she composed music that became music for a podcast that I created about writing called Telling Your Story. And by the time we went home, it was actually really sad to part. We had an extraordinary time. So I will just say, in fact, the woman who is responsible for setting up this event tonight, because I didn't know about the Cape May Library until very recently, was a student at the following year's workshop. And when she heard I was coming here, she said, well, let me just see if the Cape May Library might be interested in hosting you. So yes, that's this.
You had previously started this book and then just...
I had been working on it for 2 years, but I have to tell you that this book has gone through many evolutions. Sometimes it's sort of like the story is right out of the gate what the story is. My novel Labor Day, which ultimately became a movie that you might have seen, but the book is better, was written in sort of one swoop, and incidentally, that one involves a manhunt for an escaped a murderer on the loose who holes up on the house of a lonely single mother, and they fall in love over the course of a Labor Day weekend. And if that seems a little far-fetched, Marie, I'll just say that in the movie, Josh Brolin played the guy. Okay. But he was a really nice escaped convict. And I think even you would have liked that. Yes, I do. Anyway, so yeah, I almost totally rewrote the book. And it was it is so important for me to have readers, and it meant so much to me. Their names are in the acknowledgments of the book, actually, that Shiren and Jenny listened every night, and I read out loud. I love to read out loud. So, yeah. Yes, what's your name?
I'm Jeffrey Rudell.
Oh, Jeffrey! I kept on looking at you and thinking, I know him, but
Indeed.
Oh my
I don't need it. I'll speak loudly.
Oh, yes. Oh, can he ever? This man, actually, this man once was rather intimately involved with Donald Trump, I believe.
Let's not say intimate. Lovely audience. But I love that you're phrasing it like that.
I kept on looking and thinking, I know I didn't date him.
So 2 things. One, I want to thank you for reading that particular passage with the pie in it, because pies in your work are like Nina's and Hirschfeld drawings.
I do tend to put a pie. I put Dolly Parton.
And I've had the pleasure of having one of your homemade pies.
Yes, you have.
Thank you for that.
We haven't seen each other for a very long
we've been
time.
talking for a long time. But
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
Question. One of the things that I find most appealing about your work and most satisfying is the structure of your stories. So my question is, do you plot everything out in detail and then build on that as you draw, or do you just launch organically into it and follow your characters?
You know me, Jeff. Which do you think I do?
I think you launch into
I
it
launch.
and then
The way I do most things, yes. I should say that one of the things that I have loved doing over the years, and unfortunately I haven't done it for a while, is perform with the Moth. Have any of you heard of the Moth? And I was a very early Moth. It's you get up on a stage and you tell a story, and you do not just launch into that story. You plan it, because you have but you don't read it. And you have a certain number of minutes to tell it. And for a number of years, I was a regular storyteller, as was Jeffrey, who was a famously great Moth storyteller. So that's how we know each other. Here's what I do, and I know that it's not like this is the way to write a novel. This is my way, and every novel that I've written has pretty much been this way. I know who my characters are, and I trust that my characters will lead me to my story. I know writers who know exactly how the whole thing is going to end. John Irving has said famously that he knows the last line of not me. And it's one reason why I, for instance, wrote Labor Day really fast. I was dying to find out how it was going to end. And 15 pages from the end, I did not know. I did not know the police were moving in, those bad guys that were going to ruin this love affair. And, the kid was having a problem with his father, and the mother was sad, and I didn't know. But I do believe, that's not to say that it's just sort of anything goes, that there are certain things you know will happen based on who the people are. And I knew who these people were. I do not decide at page 150, you know what, I think this person is a bad person. I know who they are. And they lead me to my story. So yeah, that's my process. I did, however, I've never done so much sort of tracking of a book because I was following 5 main characters and a lot of other characters over about 40 years. So I had an enormous whiteboard with all kinds of Post-it notes, keeping track of how old everybody was and what grade the kids were in and what was happening in America and the world and what music was playing. And I did a lot of that. But the ending, I was 20 pages from the end of this book, and I thought, what's going to happen to these people? I can't ever give people a happily ever after, but I always look for redemption for my characters. And I'll leave it to you whether you feel that I succeeded, but that's always my goal. So we're going to talk after.
Thank you very much.
Good. I'm thrilled to see you. And I was just sitting there, I was like, what? He was on The Apprentice. That's why he knows Don. I just want to say he was.
I'm gonna go with intimate with Donald Trump.
Oh, this is not a shy crowd. Don't ruin the reputation of New Jersey for being. Yes. What's your name?
I'm Karen.
Karen. Hi.
Hi. So I love your work.
You've read other books of mine?
Yes.
Oh, good.
The Best of Us, I read it twice.
Oh.
And I went through, I'm relatively newly single after going through a divorce, which kind of still trying to figure out how to write about because it's still very painful.
You're a
but-
writer. Okay. Have I ever got a workshop
Well, I don't know
for
if
you?
I'm a writer. I would love to do a workshop with you, but I do write. And one of the things that, of all your braveries, one of the things that I am so interested in is how you love houses and you just, when you find one, you buy it. And as a single, I mean, when you find the right one, you just buy it.
You noticed that.
My question is, as somebody who's single and used to having a guy around to do a lot of work around the house, like, are you handy, or are you just break?
I'm not particularly. You know what I'm handy at? I'm handy at finding handy people. So I should explain. I'm not a wealthy woman, but I'm very good at making cheap houses great. And so I have several times done that. And in fact, there's a scene in this book in which the woman buys some real estate. I didn't mean to cut you off, Karen. Yeah. So it's really kind of a metaphor. I actually sometimes when I'm stressed or I need to just calm down, I Google real estate in some area and I just look at houses. And I like to sort of click through the rooms and imagine the life of the people, not the expensive houses. I like to look at the sort of, the fixer-uppers, and I know I could fix them up. But the book that Karen is referring to, I go back and forth between memoir and fiction. And my most recent book before this one was a nonfiction book. It was a memoir about finding and losing, within a space of 4.5 years, my very good second husband. I was 57 when we met, 59 when we married, and 61 when he died, which was 5 years ago. I guess I was 62. And I wanted to tell the story, and it's not, I hope you agree, it's not a depressing cancer story, although I think a lot of people stayed away from it fearing that. It's a love story, really. And it's a story about my discovering, rather late in the game, what it was to be a part of a couple. I never really was before. And I had a brief time of knowing it. And I am so grateful for that time. And actually, that, like every experience in our life, it teaches us the lessons for the next chapters. Although this book has nothing to do with my story with Jim, the one element really does come from that, and that is my recognition of the importance of forgiveness. The struggle, the challenge that the main character goes through in this book of being angry and bitter about the end of her marriage, the loss of her dream of the family life that she wanted to make, and her anger at her husband were emotions that I knew, and I didn't like them, and they did not serve me well. But I don't think I was ever fully able to move through them until I lived through the experience of helping my husband, first hoping that he would live, but then helping him through his last months. And it changes everything. I'll actually, Oh, but to get to real estate, after Jim died, I forgot. When Jim was dying, and it was pancreatic cancer, a particularly brutal form of cancer, and and he was valiant and heroic. He was an Eagle Scout, and that's the way that sort of things come in. He was not Russell, but he knew he had all those badges. When he was dying, and I was pretty much caring for him all the time, but I gave myself about a half hour every day when I would pour myself a glass of wine and just go off and be somewhere else and escape. And real estate has always been my escape. So I put a Google search in my computer, Lake House, New Hampshire. I come from New Hampshire. I love lakes. And it was a total fantasy. And most of these properties that came in, first of all, I could never afford them, but P.S., I didn't want them. They were big, fancy houses that weren't my style at all. And then one day, into my Google search drops this perfect house that had been in one family for 60 years, and it wasn't fixed up at all, and it had an outdoor shower, and nothing was modern, and it wasn't insulated, but I knew it was great. And I used to go and just click through those pictures, really for months. And I showed them to Jim one time, and he said, "Oh, that looks really great. Maybe I could go fishing there." And we both knew he wasn't going to, and it seemed like a fantasy that we'd even have this house. But on New Year's Eve of that year, at about 8 p.m. East Coast time, but we were in California, I called up the realtor and I made this crazy, incidentally, the house was 20 minutes away from where my daughter lives. I made this crazy low offer. It was accepted. I had bought a house. I went back into the house. I said, "Jim, I just bought a house." And typical of Jim, he said, "Oh, that's great, baby." And I didn't lay eyes on it for 6 months. But 10 days after his death, I flew to New Hampshire, and a friend picked me up at the airport. And the house was exactly the house I needed to be in. And I spent that summer doing two things: changing that house, hacking down walls, punching windows in. You can do that with an uninsulated house. Painting things, taking stuff to the dump, going to yard sales, furnishing the house, and writing the book that became the best. So, thank you for bringing up that book, and thank you for. It wasn't a book that a million people read, and I had to write it.
Read it. It's wonderful. But I just want to say I'm sorry for your loss. I'm glad I get to tell you that in person.
Thank you.
Cover jacket in New Haven, Connecticut.
I do. Can you take a guess? Why would a 67-year-old woman who had been living in California and had a house in New Hampshire and a house in Guatemala be living in an apartment in New Haven, Connecticut?
To put it in the cover jacket?
I decided, after Jim died, my life can't be over. I've learned all these things. I need to do something with them. So I had dropped out of college when I was 18 and I never went back. And I didn't ever think I would go back. I was kind of busy putting my kids through college. But after Jim died, I decided I would reapply to Yale University as a sophomore. And luckily, I located my SAT scores from 1970, and they let me in. So I'm a junior.
Congratulations.
I'm a junior. I'm not a great student, but that's okay. I'm not
Taking
looking to.
writing classes?
I want to study everything I never did study. Yeah, everything I never did get a chance to study. Yeah.
And one other thing, this is South Jersey. It's different from
Okay. I did notice.
North Jersey.
Okay, like what would North Jersey be? Princeton?
Totally. No, that's
No.
central. But,
Central, okay.
It gets more densely populated the further north you go.
Oh, okay, okay.
It's kind of rural.
Yeah. Well, come to New Hampshire and we'll talk about it. But yeah. Oh, thank you for asking. Yes, what's your name?
My question, when I read a book, I really do think about it when I finish. And I belong to Goodreads, and I do try to write thoughtful reviews. I don't try to just rehash the story, but just thoughts about it and how I kind of feel about it. Sometimes people ask questions. occasionally I've written something and the author has responded, which I just absolutely love. That I think that, and that's what I was going to ask you. If you look at Goodreads, do you read the reviews? You can leave messages. And I'm telling you, I'm thrilled if an author says, thank you for that thoughtful review. I hadn't thought, and anyway, it's just kind of one of those, that's what I wanted to ask you, is if you read your Goodreads.
Incidentally, I'll just tell you, they're important. Those reviews are important. And both, I don't want to say it in front of our lovely independent booksellers, but Amazon reviews, Goodreads most of all. And editors read them, and they're taken very seriously. So thank you, Kathy. I am going to right away go looking for how to respond, and I will.
And Goodreads has sent out blurbs about this new book, and it gave it a very good review. But it says, this is an author you have read before. You may be interested in this. I didn't know if you knew that.
I didn't
So
know that
I had
either.
already gotten a preview of your book.
Let me tell you, one of the things about going back to college 48 years after you left is technology, and it's been a challenge. I'm getting better, but it's been a challenge. Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah, there's a woman back here. And I signed a book, but remind me your name. Susie. Oh, I signed a book for somebody else. Okay.
Oh, no, let's not go there.
You say it wasn't nice, this is just different.
There it is in a nutshell.
Okay, yeah. Such a good question. I struggled with this one. So this was not the original title, and I really fought very hard for another title, and I will tell you what that title is. And actually, I'll ask you what you think of that other title. The title, I'm going to explain why, but the title was The Cork People. The Cork, C-O-R-K, The Cork People. Pretty weird title, right?
Yeah.
Would you have bought that book? Yeah. You would? No. No, and that's, enough people. Incidentally, I have a very, my editor said you cannot do that, and the readers are going to think it's about people from Cork or alcoholics, and which I do know a few things about, but, so I didn't, and I still, for a long time, still thought of it as the Cork People. So the reason, I will tell you why I wanted to call this book The Cork People. The mother in this story does something that I used to do with my children. They live in the country, they don't have much money, winter is long, winter is hard, and the first day when the snow starts to melt in March and the water starts really flowing, they live just down the road from a brook, they make these little boats to sail down the brook. And the daughter, Ursula, points out that there have got to be people in the boats, and these people have to be able to float. So they make people out of corks. And actually, over the course of the winter, when I was still thinking I was going on a real book tour, I made 100 cork people. I'm sorry I didn't bring any today. I was crazy. Everyone was different. I became a little obsessed with cork people. So anyway, and the metaphor, which I tried not to be very heavy-handed about, but it's kind of what you do with your children. You launch them. You put them in this little boat, and the waters are swirling, and it's not always safe, and they may well get stuck in the weeds or even, God forbid, capsize. And the mother and the children run alongside the edge and watch them go. And one spring day, actually, one of their Cork People years, they're standing by the edge, they've just launched their boats, and they give names to all their Cork People, the children do that. And who should come bobbing along, but actually a Cork person named Bob. And he spent the whole winter, and it just happened that this did happen to us, that he got released from the weeds, a whole year later, and the child, being a very young child, doesn't think that much of it. She just says, "Oh, there's Bob." Anyway, I couldn't name it The Cork People because there were people like you that really were not going to be on board, and I did understand that. It was a weird title. And so the husband and wife recite the Elizabeth Barrett Browning poem at their wedding, as does their oldest child when he marries. So that's how it came. But finding a title is really a challenge, and it's so important. At one point, the woman listens to a lot of Joni Mitchell and the Blue Album. That was the period of some of this book. And I wanted to call it I Wish I Had a River, you know that song. But that also seemed a little weird for some people. So I'm happy with Count the Ways. I hope you like that title. Good. Good. Coming from a librarian, that's good to hear. We have time for a couple more. Don't be shy. Please, I've come all the way for Cape. Yes. What's your name?
Oh, my name's Jesse.
Jesse? Hi.
So curious about your time in Guatemala. Did you brush up on your Spanish, and did your friends?
My friends, one of my friends spoke Spanish. The other did not, but she, by the end, she had learned some. I've been speaking Spanish for years, not beautiful, elegant Spanish, but you know, the pandemic was an opportunity if you were fortunate enough, I mean, I understand parents of young children, many people, it was, there was no time for brushing up on your Spanish, but I did take Spanish lessons again. We did arm exercises every day. One of the women was Chinese, born in China, although she lives in Brooklyn now, and so we did arm exercises in Mandarin every day, and we did all kinds of things. We cooked wonderful meals every night, and I had a closet full of sort of funny dress-up clothes that I'd gotten at markets in Guatemala, and we dressed up and lit candles and made great food, and then I read out loud. I'm very nostalgic about that time, actually. Yes. What?
Well, I'm his mom, and I think that question was prescient because it's interesting. He lived in China for 6 years.
Oh, really? Oh.
Never known.
And so you do speak Mandarin? Aha. Well, I do not really speak Mandarin. I can tell you arm exercise words in Mandarin. Shou fu, shou fu. I think it means goodbye meat. We can't end on that note. Yes. I am. I actually I finished the Count the Ways, and we weren't going home yet, so I started another whole book, and it's a novel that I happen to love. I'm going to tell you, I don't usually talk about this, but I'm going to in Cape May. I wrote a novel that I really loved that's called The Bird Hotel, and it's about a North American woman who has had a terrible experience. She's definitely not me. She's in her 30s, and something very bad has happened in her life. And she heads off to Central America. And the country is never named, but basically I recreated on the page a place that was like where my house is in Guatemala. She goes down there. She doesn't even want to live anymore, but she goes and she checks into this kind of crazy hotel of an expat woman who has started this hotel and been there for about 30 years. And within a few weeks, she's just being there, sort of not knowing what she's doing. She's adrift in the world. The woman dies, and she discovers that the hotel has been left to her. And there she is in this unnamed Central American country, and she's running a hotel that's falling apart. And I loved this book. I also read this out loud to the girls every night, and they would send me up and say, "Go, write some more chapters. We love this book." I will now tell you a rather hard thing, that as much of an advocate as I am for Latinx voices and diversity in all things, this is really troubling to me. That book will probably never be published. And even though I am in no way appropriating Latin experience or indigenous experience, my main character is a Caucasian North American woman. In the current publishing climate, probably some of you heard about the American Dirt controversy, although incidentally 500,000 people read American Dirt, but still, in the world of publishing, a writer like me can no longer tell that story. And that's a loss, not just for writers, but for readers, I think. There was a wonderful novel that came out, 20 years ago, Memoirs of a Geisha, written by a white Western man. That would never happen now. And so many, Jesse.
One other thing about Memoirs of a Geisha is he burned his source. So he had a source who was a Japanese woman, and she said, "Please don't name me in your book," and then he did.
That I didn't know. That I did not know. And I'm sure there are all sorts of legitimate complaints. Maybe he didn't do it well. But in my case, I wasn't even attempting to write a Latin point of view. I was being a foreigner, writing the story of a foreigner in this country. But unfortunately, we can't do that. There's a side story. It's not the main story in Count the Ways. But one of the children, I'm not giving any spoilers here, but because this is not what the book is about. I like to populate my books with people the way our lives are populated, with people who have different stories. And one of the children is a girl who feels from very early on that she was born in the wrong body. And this is the 90s, the 80s and the 90s, when there's not any kind of affirmation for that concept. And ultimately, this daughter transitions. And is it a book about transgender issues? Absolutely not. And I wouldn't presume to write that. I do not have a child who's had that experience. I do, however, have a child whose best friend transitioned during those years, and I know what a challenging thing it was at that period. And I consulted him. He's now living the life he always knew he should be living. He's married with children and fully who he is, and it's a happy story. It's not a tragedy. But I consulted with him a lot on that book. But I could even get hit with that one, that I'm presuming to tell a story that's not mine. But my gosh, who are writers? And what can we only tell the stories that we have lived? How narrow is that? Yeah. Yes, yes, of course. And that there's another one that probably wouldn't be possible now. Yeah, Jesse.
Yeah, I was very fortunate to be asked to speak about my experiences in the Wikipedia community in Hong Kong and when India, and I'm not Chinese, I'm not a Hong Konger. I think what I did was I explained, I'm a foreigner, I've been very graciously invited to be a part of the group.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that is what, I mean, the important thing is to do it well. And the worst crime is, to me, failing that. I haven't read American Dirt, but I would absolutely support, that writer should be able to write that book. Yes. Gail.
Yes. First of all, a shout out to, I'm glad there's someone in the Moms Club that also banned Nintendo from their kids' home.
Oh, okay. Yes.
I took a lot of flack from that for my two sons. I had to hold out for that one. And you've told us about the real estate, but you haven't told us about the pie theme.
The pie theme. Okay. So, yeah, I can tell this story in 4 minutes. My mother was a great pie maker. She was many other things. She was a brilliant woman. She was a brilliant writer. She had a PhD from Radcliffe and couldn't get a job because she was a wife and mother of the 50s. But among her many accomplishments, she made a great pie. And I never thought that I needed to learn how to make her pie because she was going to live forever. But when my mother was 66 years old, younger than I am now, she was diagnosed with a glioblastoma. And as she was dying and I was taking care of her that last summer, she was a fabulous hostess. And I knew that she wanted to say goodbye to her friends. She lived in Toronto. And so we had a dinner party every single night, and she couldn't cook anymore. So I discovered that I could make her pie. And I made a pie every single night. And her friends would take me aside and they would say, first of all, of course, they'd say, we're going to miss your mother. But then they said, we're going to miss her pie. And then they said, would you give us the recipe? So I'm sure there are many fine pie bakers in this zoo. But, and it is never about the recipe. It is about the crust, but it's not. The recipe is almost always the same. It's how you handle the dough. So I had to teach them how to make pie, which happened to be one of the most comforting things that I did. And I probably taught 20 women and a couple of men how to make pie that summer in Toronto that my mother was dying. No, that's a whole different thing. I'm not into meringue.
My grandmother made a good meringue. Nobody's been able to replicate.
And that's a sad thing. I was able to replicate my mother's. I went home and I discovered that my marriage was also over. And so I had lost my marriage and my mother, and I was 35 years old, and I felt as if the bottom had come out of my life. And the most comforting thing that I knew to do was to bake pie. And I didn't really want to eat all those pies. And people knew that I made good pies, and I started teaching them to make pies. And at first I was just teaching friends. Got to be Thanksgiving. They were all going off to their families, and this woman never has a family to go to, this woman in the book, and it was kind of me too in that way. Both of my parents were dead at that point. So for Thanksgiving, I created this annual event, which was teaching pie to first my friends and then people that I never knew. And then I started teaching pie and charging $100 a person to raise money for my candidates, and 20 people at a time. So the flour was really flying. But I figure I've taught about 1,500 people how to make pies, and sometimes my candidates got elected and sometimes they didn't, but last election I'd never cared more about an election, and I couldn't give a pie party, so I gave a virtual pie party. And I have to describe, this was so funny. The two girls who were with me in Guatemala came to my house in New Hampshire to help with this virtual pie party, and everybody who had paid their $100 came in, and they were in this gallery. There were 60 mixing bowls and 60 pastry blenders and 60 people simultaneously trying to replicate my crust. And I'm looking and saying, oh, you over there on the upper left, oh, you a little more water, a little more butter, a little more flour. And anyway, their pies mostly worked. So that's the story of the pie. And I do tend to put a pie in a book when I can. And I think that's the only pie in this book. But clearly this woman knows how to make a good pie. Labor Day pie is, I could talk with you forever, but I'm recognizing that the animals need to be fed and some other things have to happen. Probably we don't want to keep those lions awake. I'm going to read you, if you don't mind, a very short passage from near the end of this book. I can. Okay, it's page 419, but I jump around because I'm making it shorter. 439. Here was what Eleanor had learned over the years since she'd wept over a chickenpox scab on her daughter's scalp and the bald spot it left there, believing that event qualified as a heartbreak. The worst things, the ones that actually got you, were almost never the ones you spent your time worrying about. In all those years, nobody ever fell over the edge of the waterfall onto the rocks. That never happened, but plenty more did. So much else fell apart, so much floated away, so much had been broken. A person can survive a lot, it turned out. Those things change you, but you carry on. She turned her face to the racing water. Even now, in midsummer, it crashed over the rocks. But somewhere, a mile beyond this place, or 3 miles, or 5, beyond the old people sitting in their cars listening to the radio, beyond the men with their fishing poles conferring among themselves on whether the Red Sox had a chance in the playoffs, and the young couples kissing or smoking weed, and the mothers nursing babies, beyond the teenagers daring each other to jump off the rocks, and the ones, like Eleanor and Cam, just standing there, taking it all in. All those human beings figuring out how to live their lives the best they knew. Count the ways the brook would keep on running. Sometimes faster, sometimes slower, but the water never stopped moving. It flowed all the way to the dam in town, and beyond that to the river, which flowed to the ocean, which reached far as the horizon, and even farther than that. Thank you so much. Oh, I do want to say, I would be so grateful if you read this book and you like this book, like Kathy, please post a review. Tell your friends about it. That is really the way writers like me, who just keep on writing, survive. And I'm also, if anybody's like a big Facebook person and you want to, or even if you're not, I took a page from Elizabeth Warren's book, and I'd love to have my picture taken with you and just put it up on Facebook and say there's a great book out there. Thank you so much for coming. I loved being here in South Jersey.